All good, sorry?
We're all good to go? Are we good? Sorry, are we good to go?
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Great, thanks, I appreciate that. Well, welcome back, folk. Thank you for that. And just to remind everybody, we are now back in public session for the remaining item, which is obviously the item of the day. And so I think if I've understood it correctly, Ken and team are going to make some opening comments, which I'll be very interested to hear. I think probably at that stage, Ken, it's wise that we have a chance just to enable the committee to respond to any questions or comments. Then Renee and Kay be keen to hear where you're at, opinion, letter of rep, that sort of drama. And then we might have a broader discussion about the accounts themselves. And then we'll look to pass a few resolutions if we can. Okay, right, yeah. So Ken, I think I'm in your hands.
That's fine. Thank you, Bruce. So look, I guess, just taking a wee bit of time just to, I guess, talk through some of the key elements of the annual report document before we, potentially draw into the document a bit further itself if you wish to do that. So look, I'll just start the proceedings in that regard, and I guess just for a start, just a reminder that an annual report is a really important statutory and accountability document. It's certainly more than just a set of financial statements. It's a formal report back against the annual plan that was set for the year and is required by legislation to be so. And in that sense, the non-financial performance measures are just, in my view, just as important as the financial statements. In regard to the financials, having said that, in regard to the financials, just a real quick snapshot of the financials. So total revenue of $170 million. We are a large organisation. A payroll of just over $32 million. Depreciation and amortization, $39 million. So that reflects obviously the size and the value of our infrastructure networks in the transport space, in the water space, in the wastewater space, in the stormwater space, etc., etc. We achieved an operating surplus for the year of $35.5 million against a budget of $48 million. There are two quite significant non-cash items on the face of the statement of comprehensive revenue and expense, and those are vested assets of just over $30 million and discovered assets of $5.6 million. Now, it just so happens, I mean, it's kind of coincidental, but it does just so happens that those two items combined are very, very close to the amount of our operating surplus. And of course, they are both non-cash items. In terms of the balance sheet, so the balance sheet on page 46. So we have total assets now of close to $2.7 billion. The biggest part of that is $2.5 billion of property, plant, and equipment. And again, the big ticket items in that $2.5 billion are our infrastructure networks. Also a pretty decent chunk of land and buildings, obviously, in accordance with our responsibilities to the community and the needs for parks and reserves land, etc., etc. Our CapEx spend for the year was around about $125 million. So a lot of money going into CapEx. Three elements of our CapEx. Renewals. So looking after what we've got and renewing what we've got. Levels of service improvements. And then catering for growth are the three buckets of CapEx, in total $125 million. Our debt is $326 million, and that's up from the $226 million of the prior year, so a $100 million increase in our debt over the course of the year. In regard to the financial prudence measures, so just taking you back a few pages if you're following along in the report, so page 38 onwards, you can see the financial prudence measures. These are required by a set of regulations and must be reported on every year, right throughout the sector. So look, a really good level of compliance. You can see that in the green bars on the graphs. There are only two that are not met. So that's the balanced budget benchmark and the operations control benchmark. So in regard to the balanced budget benchmark, look, there's some definitional stuff in that one in terms of, in effect, you can see it in the note above the graph in terms of a whole lot of exclusions that can't go on there. They can't go in there. Yeah, there was also in the year that we're talking about, there was also, I think, a $4.8 million correct me if I'm wrong, it is $4.8 million drawdown on reserves in lieu of rates. So yeah, so that has an impact obviously on the balanced budget when we're using the reserves that we've got and accumulated rather than going to the rate part. So that's the balanced budget benchmark. The operations control benchmark, this one is on page 42, and there is non-compliance there. Actually, that you can see that there's multiple years of non-compliance there. Look, inherent difficulties in budgeting cash flows, but yet our cash position is good, obviously. So so look, just in closing in regard to the finances, so as we go forward into the LTP, which we must have adopted by June of next year. As all of you in this room, as our other elected members, and as our community is already well aware, management of debt will be a big factor going forward. I noted a few minutes ago that our debt increased by $100 million in the past year. It's due to increase by a very similar amount in the current year. And actually, if you refer back to those benchmarking graphs as well, I mean, you can see that there is noticeable change over the last couple of years in the debt affordability and the debt servicing benchmarks. So so look, we are in a space where we are managing and monitoring debt headroom very, very closely. And a very key theme in our financial strategy will relate to the management of debt and the achievement of long-term financial sustainability. Yeah, so those are my comments on the financials. I think over to George in regard to the non-financials.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, George.
Oh, thank you. So I've just had a few things I wanted to point out. So in regard to the overall annual report, I think we had relatively good results and made good progress in the non-financial delivery. On page 30 of the report, you'll see that how we delivered against organisational KPIs. So we're roughly 85% of them were completed or on track at the year end, which illustrates quite good progress against council's strategic priorities. Probably a highlight was the resident perception results. So we received higher satisfaction scores across most measures in 2024 compared to 2023. And our reputation benchmark also increased. While it didn't fully offset the historical trends, it was a really positive sign that residents are showing some increased trust in council and appreciating its efforts. And looking forward, I guess council already has several pieces of work underway and planned, which would continue to positively impact those results. Of significance is the Ahuaki and implementing the priority streams of the anchor institution framework. In terms of levels of service, so 91% of them were either achieved or within 5% of achieving target. And this is considerably higher than last year where it was approximately 74%. Just a note, we do strive to take a continuous improvement approach across everything we do, and you'll see some commentary around that from 192 of the agenda onwards when we talk about our people and our risk management practices, etc. But the other thing I just wanted to highlight, I guess, as we kind of bring the non-financials and the financial together into a story, is what Ken sort of is alluding to. It is a really challenging environment. And that is really reflected in council's risk profile. And so one of the key things over the next year is about managing those risks and really strong monitoring against the performance framework within the LTP and our top risks. that's all I really wanted to highlight.
Thank you, George. And Lisa, welcome. I think it's you who are going to speak now. So welcome to the, this may be the first time you've spoken to the committee. So,
I think it is.
but welcome. It's great to have you here.
If there's one thing I love, it really is a good annual report. And I think I've just come on board last year and was trying to get my head around how things worked here. I've got taken stock of that now and looking forward to being able to share some of the messaging from the annual report this year. I think it's fair to say that, you know, sometimes it does pay to stop and look in the revision mirror to realise actually how far that you've come. And that's not only for me as Susan, the elected members, in terms of reflecting on the sheer quantum of decision making that they've made over the past 12 months and the positive impact that that's had on communities. But internally, it's a chance for our teams to celebrate what they've achieved and work on any opportunities for improvement. And externally, it's an opportunity for our community to reflect on the value they actually get for their rate-paying dollar. And I think as a local government sector, we have always been challenged in that space to get people to understand what we're doing to help shape our communities. Unfortunately, the legislation requires us to produce an annual report and a summary document, which we've done to meet our legislative requirements. However, the legislation hasn't evolved with technology and people's shortened attention spans. So as a team, we've been thinking about ways that we can actually get our annual report messaging out there in a positive way. And we'll be doing a series of things off the back of adoption on Tuesday that will include some newspaper advertising, but some infographics and some really visual ways to get the message out there. It's a really important part of closing the loop on previous consultations that we've done as well. So different approach, and I'm hoping it will land quite well.
Thank you for that. That's wonderful. Folk, are there any sort of broad comments? We've heard some good opening comments, and I do appreciate the three of you. They have been very helpful. Are there any comments folk would like to make at this stage on that broader idea of key themes which have come from Ken and George, and also communication from Lisa? We okay? Brilliant. Okay. Well, look. Oh, sorry, Roger. You think you? Carol, didn't see you. Go for it, Roger. Were you just waving at me, Roger, or are you talking?
I didn't realise that my audio wasn't on either. Good. Yeah, I think one of the things which is, in terms of Lisa's story, with the 35 million surplus that we've got, but of course the very relevant point that was raised there is that that's basically equivalent to the non-cash amounts of vested assets and discovered assets. So although that's a really positive tag, 35 million surplus, then it's not really a surplus that can be used because it's non-cash. So there's a challenge in getting that story, Lisa, isn't it? That, you know, people will just read and say, oh, but you've got a surplus, therefore why didn't you reduce rates? But it don't work like that. So I'll be interested on Lisa's comments as to how she'll deal with that one.
Thanks, Roger, and you're exactly right. It is a difficult story to tell, and we know that local government finances are incredibly complex. I think probably the best way to do that will be visually for the community to show what that 35 million surplus is made up of, particularly around vested assets, and really breaking that language down so people on the street can understand what that means.
Roger, you've gone mute again.
Yeah, you might have to explain to them what vested assets are. Yeah.
I mean, that is, and the way in which that's said is, of course, really important, because I mean, vested assets are a really important part of the structure of Waipa, given it's a growth council. So, you know, it's to have those assets coming in itself is not a bad thing. I mean, I know we can also think about the liability side. It increases our depreciation, and you've got to service the assets and yada 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 yada. But it's also the benefit of growth that is occurring inside the district, which I think I'd rather be dealing with than non-growth. So, you know, there's ways to explain and use that. So I hear your point, and Roger, yours is a good one, that actually my rate's going down by 35 million next year. So I understand that entirely. That's good to hear. Thank you for that. I wonder if any other questions I don't sense there are. Monty?
This might be too detailed for right now. I just wanted to ask Ken to elaborate a little bit further on the operations control benchmark. 'cause
Yeah, no,
it's
that's
a-
not-
it's a,
it's right-
it's a
it's the right-
standout.
it's the
Are you
right
happy
time.
with that? And
Yep.
it kind of follows on from what Roger's saying, you know, in
Yes.
the headline number, you've got a surplus,
Yeah.
but in real life, the balanced budget metric and the operations control, where those are the ones we're failing on.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a real sense in which we're not generating enough revenue, and we're not generating the revenue we expected to generate either. And particularly the operations control benchmark one, I look at it and it's quite good having it there because it gives you that historical perspective. And you can't explain away something that's happened 5 times in a row as an aberration. I mean, that's becoming systemic. There's something happening there that we are anticipating certain operating cash flows, and 5 years in a row we failed by quite a long way too. So, Ken, can you just give me a CFO sort of oversight story on why that is? Why do we keep missing that?
Yeah, so look, it's a pretty, I mean, it's a bit of a raw measure, isn't it? So this is simply taking the budgeted net cash flow from operations, and it's a percentage of you know what the actual is. So yeah, so I mean, I guess you know potentially impact has come in the last year or two from yeah you know from slowdown in growth and yeah you know obviously a bit of you know growth cash income coming in terms of yeah you know in terms of you know planning consents and you know building consents revenue and stuff. Yeah you know some of those things you know could be a factor in the last couple of years, but then you could easily argue that go back 3 or 4 years when that side of things was booming, and yeah, and you'd be expecting yeah, you know, expecting obviously higher than budgeted levels of cash coming through from that. Look, it's something that we'd probably need to have a good look at in terms of you know what were the ups and downs that you know drove that perhaps over the last 2 or 3 years to see exactly what is going on there. But look, you know, at the end of the day, we do have a healthy, you know, cash and bank, you know, balance. Yeah, you know, I don't think we're in, yeah, you know, don't think we're overly exposed in that space. But look, this is a measure that quite clearly, yeah, you know, we do have difficulty complying with. Yeah.
Yeah, and just closing that off for me, you know, this is the rearward looking bit. So you're looking in the rear view mirror,
Yes.
but then you turn around and you're setting your rates forward looking.
Yes.
And it just makes me wonder, are we systematically overestimating our ability to generate revenue from operations, which is a problem looking forward when we're setting our
Yes.
rates?
Yeah.
So look, we're right in the middle of the LTP, but reading this, it was kind of the question for me.
Yes.
The biggest question I had was that.
Yep, no, fair enough.
Look
And-
forward
and-
to discussing it further as we go through the LTP.
Yeah,
but-
yeah. So let's make that a focus area in the LTP council. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Renee,
Can I comment on that one?
here you go for it. No, very, very.
So the baseline for this one is the budget. So it could be that the cash flow projections and the actuals are working, you know, as per plan, as per the team's planning, but that the budgeting is maybe not exactly where it should be. So going into LTP, that's something that could be just a little bit of a focus to make sure that this is more aligned going forward.
We've got, so I mean, I take on board the point. This actually is a key number for me because I relate 4 things: depreciation, particularly the net cash flow from operations. Now, it's an inexact science, but they should at least, it's ideal if they equate. Actually, in this case, they do. But actually, it's not, the budget is the interesting point. It's not a case of, does it just equal depreciation? It's actually what cash should we have in our bank? And let's remember, this is the financial strategy. We've been tracking in the risk committee land sales, and they're slow. Now, the land sales would have been built into the budget. So in fact, that cash number is lower than it should be. So actually, it isn't the right answer. So I don't mean this. This is not a a challenge. This is not a challenge to staff. It's actually a challenge to actually, can we set a financial strategy that we can keep to? Because if we had kept to that needed sale of, for instance, surplus land, that number would be higher. So it's actually a question. It's a question ultimately of is the balance actually what we should be achieving, as in contrast to anything else. It's not the wrong number, but actually we did intend to be in a different position, and that's
Sorry, Chair, actually, the cash
we'll
from.
go through the capital line, right?
Yeah, the cash from sales, this is just restricted
which is
to
just the operation. Sorry,
activities,
you're right.
So there won't be a reason.
Sorry, I've said, technically, Ken is absolutely correct. I've put you down the wrong line. The capital receipts will come into the next section, but it does reflect trying to understand why is that underneath where it should be. And it comes back to the budget question, because actually the budget is our strategy, is a reflection of our strategy. I mean, you can overemphasize it, but my point is that's what we've set ourselves out to be in a certain position in a year's time, in 3 years' time, 10 years' time. We need to hit that. So that's really it. It's a really good question. And Ken, I'm grateful if that's something that you folk want to focus on, because I think we should. It is a key, it is a reasonable question and something that we should monitor from a financial strategy perspective. Okay, cool. Any other questions? I wonder at this stage, we've talked in generalities and we do. Oh, sorry, Carol.
Yeah, I just had a question. I'm not sure if now is the appropriate time to ask it or not, but it's just around for the draft summary of the annual report, so the summary report, and there's quite a lot of detail in there around the contingent liabilities. And so if I look at page content, and I think Lisa touched on it earlier around, it's hard to present something in a summary, and it does seem quite comprehensive, the information that's in there. I think it's page 209 and 210. And I just wondered if for the summary report, it was possible for that to perhaps be condensed down, but aware that, there's that fine balance between visibility, but not, using pages and pages to sort of tell the story. So I'm not sure if that's an audit question or a Ken question. Yeah.
Well, I think firstly, I'm happy to engage in the question, Carol, because actually it goes back to Lisa's point. What can we disclose? How do we do it succinctly? I presume this has been prepared on the basis of what the standards require, but I'm no oracle on standards, so perhaps somebody can help us. Are we disclosing there what we have to disclose, or can it be summarised? I mean, it's a repeat. It's a rinse. What does it say? Rinse and repeat of what's in the annual report. Are we able to reduce that in size? I agree. It's quantum-wise, it's big. Any thoughts? No? Well, perhaps that's something that we've got part of the resolution to allow Steph, as the Chief Executive, to make minor editorial changes. Perhaps we'll include that under the minor editorial changes, Carol, and let Ken and the team, along with Renee and the team, just work through that concern that there's a domination there in terms of pages. Can it be reduced? Okay. Any other broad opening questions? No? I wonder if at this stage, rather than actually dive into the report, I wonder, Renee, if knowing where you're at, then allows us to have one final sweep through the annual report, which I don't, by the way, members propose to make particularly long at all. But let's hear from you about the position you've reached, please, Renee, and the results. You've got a few bits of paper for us to deal with.
Yes, thank you very much. You've got a handout that Yolanda gave us this morning. This is just a short status update of where we are today. So the report is, there's 6 headings there. If we can just move to page 2, just quickly take you through the main audit areas that we focused on. The first one is our risk of management override of internal controls. That's a requirement for us to always, so you'll always hear the same story there. We look at journals, we look at all estimates, and we look at anything that seems unusual in terms of the financial records. So we concluded on that area. We haven't found anything of concern to us. So all good on that front. As you've seen from Ken's presentation, PPE is quite a substantial number in the balance sheet. So for this year, there were no revaluations, formal revaluations. What we did is we looked at a fair value assessment from management. We also performed our own to make sure that there's no material movement between the book value and the fair value for PPE, and we were satisfied on that front. So that matter is closed as well. We have been talking a little bit about the vested assets. So it's the second year in a row, unfortunately, that there's a prior period error on vested assets. There's a bit of a timing delay in getting in finance to get the costings to get the vested assets in. So there's a bit of a cut-off issue that we got that we had to deal with this year. So management helped us from early on in the audit to get that point across the line. So there's a prior period error again that you'll see in the financial statements this year that's coming through. The vested assets for this year was also increased quite a bit by the process we did this year in terms of getting reliance on the completeness over vested assets, which we believe we got to. So that issue is also cleared at this point. Maybe just to mention at the bottom of page 2, there's also a little bit of late capitalizations that came through. We didn't mention it, or we didn't require it specifically to be mentioned in the annual report because it's in your PPE, in the PPE line itself. So in that note, the work in progress and the PPE capitalizations is just a movement in there, but we do note it because of some of the cutoff issues that we are seeing. If we go to page 3, we looked at asset impairment considerations, didn't find anything of concern there. We looked at all the major capital projects, no issues identified there. Accounting for financial instruments, we can just note the airport. There's the investment in the airport that we looked at specifically, no issues noted. There is a additional disclosure that's made on the local water done well program. So last year, remember, we had a emphasis of matter in the audit report. That's not there anymore. There's only disclosure in your annual report. Capital commitments was one area that took us a little bit of additional time and effort to work through. So council has got a system that works with all your capital commitments on an operational level, which from our perspective works well. We do, however, have to translate that into what the accounting standards require, and that's there's a little bit of effort involved in getting that translation and then our audit testing on that. But we've closed that, and there's no issues further to be noted. Then just on point 2, just very shortly, control environment. No significant issues there. We will follow this up with our report to council, where there will be a couple of things. We'll also comment on the prior year recommendations and where we are with that. But that's to come. There's nothing significant to be noted for this annual report process. Okay, on page 4, we just note the one finding is around cut off. You would have, it's kind of a little bit of a theme today, but there is a bit of cut off in terms of the creditors, the accruals, the PPE, the vested assets, those type of things. So we will mention that in our report. In point 4, we've got uncorrected misstatements. So this is not because management did not want to make the adjustments. These are extrapolated misstatements. So what we say is in our sample testing, we can see that there's some issues in those balances. It's around cut off again, all of them basically. But it's an extrapolated number, so it's not something that you would go and adjust on your report. It is, however, above our clearly trivial level, and that's why we are required to report it to you. There's on page 5 a couple of things we are still wrapping up. The one is without going into much detail, there's a reclassification of the Fonterra water rates on the financial statements, which we checked with OAG Legal. The opinion only came out yesterday, so it's basically closed, but just making sure that we've got the correct disclosures that they require. So you'll say point 2 is closed. That was just aligning the notes. That's all fine. We did receive a updated guidance from the OAG in terms of the road smoothness measure that's in your annual report, and we're just closing off all the requirements on that front. We'll just keep on reviewing the annual report. So I see there's a couple of last changes that Yolanda gave. So it's just a continuous process, obviously up till the day that we sign, to make sure that everything's addressed. We look at all the minutes for the meetings up to, so we'll, just consider this as well, and wrapping up final sections of the audit. Just again, thank you for everybody's assistance, management, especially that worked through the audit with us. Just a sincere thank you for the process this year. And that's my story. So just for any questions.
Story's not quite finished because I'm interested in the other document, particularly the opinion. I just wonder if you could reflect on us the opinion, please, Rena.
I should have
that
started.
you propose.
Apologies, I should have started with that one.
Yeah.
So clean audit report at this point, nothing to mention there. It will be a unqualified, unmodified report. The other one is just the representation letter that we'll require you to sign. We've got a standard letter across the sector. There's one section bullet point that we've added that we'll just highlight, and it's around the completeness of the vested assets. So at this point, I'm saying I'm signing off on it, but I do also require you to sign off that it's now complete. So that was the only edit that was made on the standard letter.
Brilliant. So before I open up for questions, just to confirm, you're on track, because I think it's Tuesday, I'm about to say Monday, let's not make it Monday again. Tuesday, meet to adopt the annual report. At this stage, it is an unmodified, it's an unqualified opinion, which is exactly music to our ears. Can I just check, you're not, the one sort of subsidiary you got left is the road smoothness. You don't see that as affecting the opinion, correct?
We've already done the work. I just need to wrap up the review. No concerns noted. Okay,
brilliant. That's great. So we're on track for the right result, which is great. So look, firstly, any questions folk would like to raise at this stage with, yes, Monty?
Thanks, Bruce. Just your point about record keeping of capital commitments, our internal processes translating through to the accounting standards. Is it easy to explain to me what you have to do there, and are our internal processes good enough in your opinion?
Yes, to the last question. I think internally it works operationally quite well. So to give you an example, and I think Yolanda can maybe jump in, but the process is to raise, if a contract is entered into, you would there's a service committee that approves that contract. They approve it, for example, with a contingency number. So what goes into the system would be that complete number, and a PO is raised, if I'm correct, to get that full amount in. On the accounting standard side, we can only look at the contract that's signed. So one of the things that we need to do is take out, or not us do, Yolanda and her team do, is to take out all of those contingency amounts to get to the contracted number for us. That becomes a little bit complex when you start going into variances and you go into payments that's been made to date. And it's just that translation, and it's quite a long list of contracts. You would think it's a couple, but it was a list of, I don't know, 120 something.
So interestingly, that's one of the few times where the accounting standards is giving you a more risky picture of the business than real life, right? Because you're taking out contingency sums. Yeah. I always thought the accounting standards were kind of worst case scenario, but that's
there's a few accountants in the room.
Thanks. That's good.
But actually, look, a really helpful point, and it does reflect ultimately as we do our accounting, and I'm confident generally staff do, but we have to keep in mind also how we report on these, and it does reflect the difference between the two, Monty. Thank you for the question. Thank you. Any other questions at this stage of Renee or Kay? Okay, why don't we then move on to the actual annual report? And I think we've got yes, I think it'd be good to see the final late adjustments at this stage as it stands. Yolanda, if you'd like to, or not, like to take us through that, and then I'd like to suggest we just have a quick chance for final comments, for editorial comments, he stresses, on the annual report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So there are a couple of changes that we would just like to highlight to the committee that will affect in the version that will be adopted by council. The first one is on your agenda, page 64, page 51 of the annual report. It's in note 6. The fee to Audit New Zealand, we had the overrun as from last year as 32,000. It should be 23,000, and then the balancing goes into other expenditure. So we've made that correction. Then on sorry, I'm going backwards, page 37 of your agenda, for the rates affordability increase, where we measure the actual rates percentage, you currently have it as 6. That is what we went out with when we had the annual plan adopted. When you calculate the actual movement in rates from the face of the financial statements, that translates to 6.3%. So the difference between the annual plan and actual is part of the annual plan, we have an estimate of volumetric charges. When we get to final, we then include the actual water charges, the rates penalties, as well as the impact growth had on our rating base. And that then, so it is still within the rates limit set, but it is different.
That's odd.
That was my question, because what is the limit? It looks like about 6.3. Yeah.
It was 6.3.
Thanks.
Then the other change is on page 97 of your agenda, note 24. On the equity note, on the face of the statement of changes in equity, the amount was correct for retained income. However, it did not translate into note 24 in your version. So we have replaced that note with the correct values. Other than that, we'll make some editorial suggestions received from Councillor St. Pierre as well as from Carol. She's indicated that she has a couple of changes for us. So we'll make those changes under the recommendation, a provision in the report. And then one last, as Renee was talking about the audit opinion, in the summary annual report, page 203 in your agenda, it still refers to an emphasis of matter in the audit opinion. So we'll remove that sentence.
Thank you.
That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Well, that's a good sign. So we're into essentially editorial changes. I appreciate, I mean, we shouldn't treat those as small, but they are quality tidy up, which is really good. Well, and accuracy as well, which is good commitment. So thank you for that, Yolanda. So look, at this point, I think the right thing's being done. Obviously, some of you members have picked up the audit editorial comment and have slipped them through to Yolanda, which I think is probably the basis for it. Is there any comments or questions folk would like to make actually on the annual report itself, which essentially in this form, we as a committee are going to be recommending to council they adopt? Any final comments or questions on that? Could I just sneak through, Ken, if it's okay, a couple of questions which I just think is important to ask at this stage so that we can actually pass the resolutions. It's not just you, Bob, I'd have to give the answer, Ken. It could well be your team as well. So I'd just like to go to page 90 of the agenda, which is note 20. Sorry, look, all I'm doing here, members, is just recognising that our obligations, and indeed Renee's obligations, are to take into account all information up until the date that this thing is signed off, which is Tuesday. So I'm just wanting to get very quick questions to note 20 is our provisions. There's nothing that's come up. We looked at this. I've asked the same questions about 10 days ago. There's nothing come up that would affect us in the way in which we should think about our provisions. It's basically landfill. It's fine. I don't think it's going to change. There's nothing new that's coming at that time. Correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Certainly nothing to our knowledge.
Thank you. I'm asking the obvious questions here, Ken. I've only been a pain, but it's useful. In a similar vein, note 25, I think it's page 102, is the contingency note. Again, there's nothing here, which is actually there's nothing here that we should update, upgrade, note new that's come in that could affect the contingency note, right?
Yep, that's
Good.
correct. There is
Gregor,
nothing.
Great. This is page 105 is note 27, the events after balance date, which I think is a nil return. There's nothing that we need. There's nothing new here that we should take into account.
Nope.
Good. Thank you. That's absolutely fine. That gets me then to the letter of rep. So I'm comfortable with the accounts. So I don't propose if in the stage is any minor editorial stuff, as I say, flick that to Yolanda. I think
Yolanda,
would
yep.
be great. Thank you very much. So that leaves us then with one other matter. So the opinion draft we've seen, nothing changed. You tidy up, we tidy up. That's the opinion, the opinions. We've got one editorial question clearly on the summary about can we squash it down in terms of the additional notes. The letter of rep. So this is a really important one. Susan, you and Steph have to sign this off. And quite rightly, actually it's foundational. If we can't sign this in all good faith, actually we won't get an audit opinion. And I don't blame Renee for taking that stance. In other words, we tell them it's good to go and then they will do their piece. So it's not a bad thing. We do it every year. So all I'm wanting to ask, Ken, of staff is there are a lot of assurances being provided here to Renee. We've provided all information. We've provided all the information that she needs to deal with it. There are some assertions in here. So, you know, I haven't got their reps, sorry, I'm looking at your response. There's comments on things like we disclosed all matters such as fraud, suspicion of fraud, etc. And we have, again, just as I've gone through contingents and liabilities, we've actually disclosed everything to her. And indeed, on the final page, we're comfortable that the organisation is a going concern. So can I just ask what processes internally has the organisation gone through that would enable the committee to be assured that we can recommend this be signed off?
Yeah, so I can answer that question. So look, well, I personally have read the letter, and certainly happy with the assertions. Yeah, I mean we've got internal knowledge sharing, etc. That gives us confidence that that the set of accounts is complete and that all of those assertions are fine. I mean, these are relatively standard assertions. There are obviously some that are unique. Like for instance, I noticed a very specific one there in terms of, this is on page 227 of the agenda in regard to Waikato Regional Airport Limited, and the basis of our assessment of value in that space. So yeah, look, we've had a good read through. We've got the appropriate processes in place, and yeah, look, I'm confident that we can make the assertions that are required.
Good. I'm good. I would have been worried if you said you couldn't, to be honest. And Yolanda, just noting the one new thing there, we're comfortable now that we've thrashed vested assets, we've got it right.
Yes, Chair. So
Fresh being not a particularly good accounting term, but you know what I mean.
so I think the final test we did with Audit used a different source than what we've used, which would be our safety net. So we have implemented processes. We will review that report on a quarterly basis so that we do not have,
Brilliant. That's good. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got management assurances team that actually the letter is good to go. It doesn't present any objective issue for us as a committee to reflect on. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm sweeping both letters of representation together up here to Renee. Okay, so can we unless there's any questions, can we go to the resolution? You want to make a statement?
Chair, I do just note that in regard, and this is a little bit of a timing matter. So if you look at page 231 of the agenda, appendix 2, uncorrected disclosure deficiencies, there was potential anticipation of a concern with the cash flow, but audit since providing this have worked through that, and I understand that is no longer relevant as noted in Renee's Renee's memo tabled today. So so I might just in case anyone was wondering, wondering that one basically disappears.
Superb, Ken. Thank you for that. Actually, that's really good to know. And obviously, Susan, you signed this on Tuesday, so it is potentially moving, still a moving beast, but I think it's pretty much at the end point, which is really good. Hey, that's wonderful. Can we go to the recommendations then, please, which are on page 3 of the annual, page 11 of the agenda. So look, the first one is we received the report, and it's actually of Nada. Nada, thank you for this. You've done a lot of hard yards and behind the scenes. We haven't recognised that, so thank you for your part in this as well. That we have, we consider, and we can put that in the past tense now, the annual report. And we do recommend that this draft annual report to council is adopted and published pursuant to section 98. That we've got a month to do that, but we're saying it's good to go. And similarly, we're saying that the summary of the annual report itself is good to go. D is important because we've got a couple of matters which we know we want to look at, but we're delegating to, sorry, it's not to Steph actually, it's to you, Ken, which I think is quite fine by me, the authority to make minor editorial changes. And there's obviously 1 or 2 just to pick up and tick off, which is fine. The final one is we've reviewed the representation letters required by Audit New Zealand, and we're recommending that they be signed. Okay, that's really good. Look, I would want to take the privilege, if I can, to move these motions. I think it's important that you know your independent chair is pretty comfortable and very happy. But do I have a seconder? Thank you, Roger. Is there any, I want to put the motion, is there any discussion on the motion? I think just before I put it, I just, it would be remiss of me not to, firstly, Renee and Kay, thank you for your hard yards. Again, appreciate you being here and your openness with what have been your views around the audit. We certainly look forward to your reporting to us later on. Kay, you've got a bunch of people behind you as well. Opie, I think, met yesterday as well in the process. Can you please pass on our appreciation to the rest of your team? It sounds like they were doing a wee bit of work over the weekend just to make certain this is nailed. So I do appreciate that. Ken and Yolanda, Nada, George, Lisa, I'm risking now trying to remember names. I'm sure there are many more inside the organisation that have helped get us there. None of this is ever done easily, but I'm appreciative of your commitment to this process, which is really important. And actually, Ken, as we already discussed today, and thank you actually for your presentation. I almost would love to see that in the front piece, but it's actually reflecting that actually this document is really important for us as we go into the 9-year LTP. Even the discussion we've had around about what do these numbers mean, etc., are really important when we come to the financial strategy. So Ken, Yolanda and team, this puts us in a very important but good position to be able to think seriously about the challenges in front of us in the way that you've outlined them, Ken. So thank you. So thank you, everybody. So with that, and not trying to waste too much more time, we have the motions. I'd like to put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. That's wonderful. Where am I at? Have I finished?
Yeah.
Okay, I better just make certain I do the file thing. That's great. Thank you very much for getting us here, everybody. Ken, if you would honour us with the closing karakia, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
That's fine. Okay, the closing karakia. Ki tau te rangamari e, ki runga i ngā iwi o